just going to do a quick wrap up of the campaigns of the French Foreign Legion here. This was the uh, Strategy and Tactics 200. And finishing up here with, this was Tonkin, the invasion of North Vietnam, and started in February of 1884 to January of 1885. This one is a little more interesting than the other two. There was actually a lot more forces involved and a lot more potential. If you see here on the map, the red border there shows you the border with China, and you can have Chinese troops come in, which are these, you see some of those yellow troops there, are Chinese troops. There's actually a big stack over here that I used a column counter for. The Chinese come in as a special event, and I was fortunate enough to roll it. I mean, if you don't have the Chinese come in, it'll be another French massacre of all of the Vietnamese native troops. But I did roll the Chinese intervention event. Made things a little more interesting because at the time my French forces were fairly scattered. Unlike the other games, although the Algeria scenario, you can also end up with scattered French troops that end up getting hit by larger stacks of guerrillas. That wasn't an option really to happen in the Dahomey scenario. But here, I've got the French forces scattered around a bit. And where did I put my tweezers? Here. I had the French forces scattered around amongst all these fortresses, because you get victory points at the end of the game if you take these fortresses. And then I had to leave a guarding force here in Haiphong along with my coastal fleet. But the French forces had taken these fortresses and then had moved up here and kind of split into two main columns, and moved up here to take these northern fortresses. They ended up having to abandon this one once the Chinese came in, because the Chinese stacked most of their forces here, came across the border, hit this fortress. They had an engineer, they could have gotten in, and it was defended at the time by just one French unit, but blew the engineer roll and ended up with a -3 modifier on all their attacks for the fortress, which pretty much rendered them combat ineffective, which was too bad because the Chinese actually they had like 8 units of very powerful artillery that could have really inflicted a lot of damage. And of course, with that -3, they ended up completely missing and inflicting no damage. And that actually happened in multiple battles with them. I rolled terribly with the Chinese. They did have a really good chance to isolate and destroy some French units, but they're getting stuck here in front of this fortress. Allowed me to bring my main French column that was up here down to counterattack and push them back across the board into their Chinese fortress. As you can see, the French column there. Didn't really take too much damage. Still plenty of French troops in those columns. So, there's actually a potential here if you can get some decent rolls with the Chinese. There's actually a potential to create a bit more of an interesting tactical scenario than what you got in the other playable scenarios. But still, ultimately, there was just such a huge hole in victory points that really, the Chinese, the bigger problem is that they came in too late. I think they came in like November or December of 1884, like 3 turns before the end of the game. That's just not enough time for them to isolate the French enough and spread out and pick some of these fortresses off and try and take some victory points back from the French. It just wasn't really possible for them to do it. So it was another fairly easy win by the French, but only because of some terrible die rolling for the Chinese and the fact that they came in too late to really affect things. Because I started getting a lot of guerrilla fortresses that I could spread throughout these villages that started popping up off of the reinforcement rolls. I finally started hitting some reinforcement rolls, started getting some Vietnamese guerrillas into the game, and I had a fairly decent guerrilla force here that ended up getting counterattacked and destroyed by the French column 1 here. So I didn't get a chance to marshal my guerrilla forces and try and take back any of these fortresses here. So there's possibilities here that don't exist in the other games. So this one is a little more interesting. But overall, this game as a whole from this issue, pretty much a bust. Just because the rules were, just not proved. They just took it from the Sun Never Set system and didn't make any changes. I mean, even even like stuff on the map, like the terrain effects chart, just pulled directly from the Sun Never Sets because it says MP cost British. Well, there's no British in this game. This is all French. So, just typical DG bullshit like that, where they just don't give a shit enough to put any effort into these games, and it ends up showing in the final product. The system kind of helps illustrate why there's not a lot of games on these colonial era battles. It's just the natives are just going to get their asses handed to them, particularly if they don't get tactical superiority in your tactical superiority check at the beginning of the combat. If they do get tactical superiority, and like the Chinese here, they've got quite a few units of very powerful artillery. They could actually inflict some devastating casualties on the French, but it just never really happened in any of the games that I played. So maybe you get the rolls to go your way, and it's less of a brutal system on the natives. But ultimately, there's just not a whole lot that they can do, especially if they're relying primarily on melee weapons. The French have artillery and machine guns. What are you going to do? The result's about what you're going to expect. So, I'm glad I played it. And I bought this a couple of years ago, and I think it was like $40 or something. I mean, it was more expensive than a typical S&T mag. It's a tough issue to find cheaply. I'm glad I didn't pay the more common $50 plus rate for it. Just not really worth it, in my opinion. The main reason I got it was because I was very interested in this time period, and there's just no games on it. And the system kind of shows you why there's no games on it. So anyway, kind of swing and a miss on this one, but I am glad that I gave it a try finally, so I could throw an opinion out there. Hope you enjoyed.